So the terms assimilation and acculturation you may have heard before, and unless you're an expert on kind of sociology, you might not fully understand what the difference is. So I just want to break it down so you understand kind of how to use them, or if you hear them, what they mean. So assimilation is a term that is used when you kind of take on a new culture as your own. So you're absorbing yourself into it and you really kind of become identified by that new culture. And acculturation is adopting traits and pieces of a culture, but still maintaining your original culture as well. So when you want to focus on, if someone identifies as multicultural or bicultural, some people who may have immigrated earlier on, a few decades ago, it wasn't really trendy to kind of maintain your culture. Really, it came down to survival. You wanted to appear as American. They may have tried to get rid of their accent. They may have tried to not want their children to learn English or to learn, their old language. They wanted them to learn English because they really wanted them to feel assimilated, because just to be frank, it was deemed more acceptable to want to be this version of American. And nowadays, it seems like we're really starting to step back a little bit and being more prideful about where people are coming from and holding on to those cultures. So nowadays, you might find that parents who are bilingual, they're teaching their kids. I know a couple that one woman, she speaks Spanish and her husband, is Black, and they speak to their kids. One might speak in Spanish, the child has to respond in English. The dad, he speaks in English, the child has to respond in Spanish. So that is an example of acculturation, of maintaining and adopting different parts of cultures. And another kind of metaphor that works is think of it as a salad. You throw in tomatoes, you throw in cucumbers, different elements, and you're kind of picking up different cultures here and there. So say if you're immigrating from, Korea, and you want your kids to be acculturated to American culture but not lose their Korean culture, you'll teach them about the food. You'll want them to learn Korean, but you'll also understand that they're going to pick up on things at school. But assimilation would be someone who would be like, you don't speak Korean at all, you have to speak English, and that's sort of an older way of thinking. It does still exist for certain cultures, but just keep that in mind that, assimilation is more like a soup. You're kind of absorbing and getting rid of the old culture, where acculturation is adopting different traits, but also maintaining your own. So this comes into play for people who are bicultural because they oftentimes have to kind of step in and out of their native culture and then American kind of traditional culture. And they do that by going to school. If you grow up in a public school, you're going to learn English. You're going to make friends with people who come from different backgrounds. But when you go home, if your parents don't speak the language, you're going to have to kind of switch back. So that's where these terms kind of come into play for people who kind of have to live in both cultures. But we just want to make sure that those terms are clear whenever you read them or if you use them. But I think that we're starting to enter an era that it's becoming more acceptable to kind of embrace multiple different cultures. People are starting to kind of, get married to people of different cultures. So I think that those terms will probably not be as strongly used in the future, but just as context for you, depending on whether you're talking to older generations or younger that are bicultural, those terms might pop up. So in terms of, practically what can you do with these terms and how can you know what is appropriate to use or what is not? I would say always look for that personal connection. What are interests that you share? If you have kids and they have kids, what are those common values that you're trying to teach your children? And finding those similarities will kind of help you better understand different things that they're adopting, and maybe you can start adopting some things from their culture as well. So yeah, always find those personal connections and understand the historical context when it comes to assimilation versus acculturation.